Hello, and welcome to the Slideshow. I'm Dakota Jackson. I'm a trombonist, currently a video game tester. I have a master's degree in jazz studies, and I'm just interested in cultivating an appreciation of the trombone. Normally, I'd have Ben with me, but since we're doing a two-part episode and this is just the second part of what we recorded last time, it's just me going right now. If you haven't checked out the first part, please go back and listen. We talk about technique as well as how the slide even works, what slides are made of, and kind of the history of how the slide came to be. And in this part, we'll kind of get into slide weights in a little bit more technical depth. I do, although, have a album rec for you guys this week. The album is The Freedom Sounds featuring Wayne Henderson. People Get Ready. I did kind of reference this album last episode, and I was talking about Wayne Henderson having like a trombone with like a Dizzy Gillespie bend in it. And you can see that on the cover of this one. It's like a black lacquered trombone with a red end bell. I'm not really sure what it is. I'm not even gonna guess. Normally what he played on was a silver trombone, which I think was like some kind of con, maybe like a 48 or something, but I have no idea what this particular horn is. As far as who's on the album, Wayne Henderson is on trombone, Pancho Bristol is on bass, Paul Humphrey is on drums. Um, there's Al Abreu on soprano and tenor sax, Jimmy Benson on bari sax, and then Harold Land Jr. on piano, and then a number of people on percussion instruments, bells and bongos, Max Garduno, congas, Moises Ablacion, flute, Jimmy Benson, and timbales, Ricky Chamelis. That's kind of all I got this week to start off with. I'm not even going to do a news section. I did just play a Mardi Gras on Everlab, but I'll probably talk about that next week. But thank you guys for checking this out. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. This week came out pretty fast because we got recorded at the same time, but probably be back on every 2 weeks. As always, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. Yeah, man. So talking about carbon fiber, I think the obvious next thing to hop into is weight. And like I was talking about earlier, when I've been given slides, I never really thought about like slide weight. So in terms of what the difference was between a normal slide, I just knew like I knew like I like lighter horns in general. And so like I like slides that were lighter, but it wasn't something I crazy thought about, and I certainly hadn't thought about comparing it to other slides. And it's funny, like you would think that like lighter slides are faster, and so why would anyone want heavier slides? But the two schools of thought basically boil down to that lightweight slides are faster and better for playing quick passages, require less work, and allow people to be nimble, if you will. And heavier slides have a more centered tone and durable. Thinking like slide has a large effect on the tone and the response, like you would hypothetically want a heavier slide. Now, I think like for me personally, like, and this is super my opinion, like I'm a huge bell guy, so when I'm looking at tone stuff, I'm not too worried about what my slide's doing for me. But I can see how that would be a thing. And some people even go as far as to be like, when I have like a lightweight slide, like I just can't hit anything because it's like just like not centered and it's squirrely. And I do think that slides have some effect on tone, but I don't know to what degree I believe that. I don't know, man. Like Ben, like what's your thought on like slides and like the tone versus just lightness?
Yeah, so I've kind of thought this too, but I think the carbon fiber debate has really put this on its head. So a lot of it's got to be in your head. The idea that, oh, this is probably a thin material, therefore that tone is going to be, I think you described it well, squirrely. We've heard that, but who knows how much of that's actually a mental game? That's not something you can quantify on a piece of paper. I mean, I'm sure you could feel it, but I don't know if necessarily having a heavier slide would confirm that. So I have now these are very different from bones, but they surprisingly fit together pretty well. I have two Con 48 bells. I have a Con 18. I have a couple Con 18. I think everybody has a couple Con 18. If you don't know, you have a Con director and you're at it. Anyways, so I have a Con director, which is just your run of the mill student, sixth grade trombone. All right, you can beat this thing up. The slide on this thing is, normal weight. I would say it's heavy, but there's no such thing as heavy. While I also have that Con 48 that has that nickel lightweight slide. I don't know if I could tell you a difference when it comes to uh, the feel, like the sound between those. I'd need to go back on that. No, I would say the Con 48 probably. I'd get, when you're mixing and matching bells and slides, you're going to have some weird things going on. So that's not fair. But I don't think the word squirrely ever comes into effect with that horn. So, and most people who own a Con 48 would probably say the same thing. It doesn't really feel like a big squirrely horn. They're both 500 bore trombones. They're relatively comparable. If I had a Con 6H, it would be more comparable, something more along the lines, but I don't. Big fan of cons. So if anybody's got a Con 6H they want to donate to me for the sake of comparing, hit me up. I'm open. But yeah, like squirrely was never a thing that I really noticed on that. And I did notice a weight difference. Mattered to somebody like me who wasn't playing fast passages as much, especially on a tenor trombone, little jazz horns. But I mean, the weight difference is nice every now and then. As a bass trombone player, you're used to having all that extra weight. It's nice to just kind of not worry about that. Your hands do get affected after a long time playing, for sure.
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel I feel like we're kind of taking a hard stance on like it doesn't matter what your slide's made out of, but like I've said a million times, like there's other thoughts out there, and certainly like some people, once again, I've never played carbon fiber, so I have no real opinion on this. But some people I've on the internet, I found several people in the forum basically saying that when they put it on, it was like playing a P-bone. And damn, like that to me, it's just like the biggest trombone insult I've you can have. But I mean, yeah, I mean, like weight in terms of like how your body's holding up is certainly a factor. I know that Doug Yo, who's like a pretty famous bass trombonist, used to be in the Boston Philharmonic. He just recently switched over to a carbon fiber bass trombone, and I don't know if he's using it all the time, but he was raving about it just on how it was like holding up his body, and he was like he like played it on top of a mountain to be like, hey, I was able to get this up here, and like that's kind of like an out there jokish thing, but at the same time, that's totally a factor. I mean, I know the tuba player in Canadian brass is playing on a carbon fiber tuba now, and it's just because he's an older gentleman and he's just like not trying to destroy his body. And I totally think there's a lot of validity to that. Also, like I was saying with the metal allergies, like I do think that exploring carbon fiber is something that we should continue to do no matter what, even as somebody who's not really played on them.
Yeah. So if you're thinking that maybe weight doesn't matter right now, give it a few years. There's plenty of people with carpal tunnel that are coming up with different ergonomic ways to hold the trombone. But being a bass trombone player, I'll tell you, those braces and stuff like that get in the way. And if the instrument was a little bit lighter, it would help. And I'm not saying that a light slide is going to change my sound. You get used to the weight you're used to. However, having something comfortable, that's nice. And I think that the idea of carbon fiber without me having played on it, that's a good effort. And hopefully we'll continue to pursue something like this. And to see professionals also doing this, well, yes, lots of professionals seem to sell out based on whoever offers them whatever. I do think that these guys are honestly picking these things because it's most, I guess, comforting for them. I mean, even if you made a slight marginal sacrifice in sound, which I'm not saying they are, they might not, they might get an improvement. I don't know. Even if you made a slight compromise, if you could play for that much longer, it'd be worth it. I mean, realistically, most instruments that you buy that are of good quality, well, they'll work. A Bach 42, for example, they've been plenty of great albums recorded with a Bach 42. I guess I should have said a King 2B. Bach 42s have been on many orchestral albums, but yeah, the King 2B has been good enough for many albums. Pretty basic trombone in the grand scheme of things, but yet here we are, like good enough if it's comfortable is probably going to get you by.
Yeah, I am. I know we'll kind of get into this later in this little sneak peek. I'm not trying to like get into this right now because this is a whole like path right here, but just you mentioning albums with the King 2B, like it's funny, if you go to the internet and you look up what trombone JJ Johnson used, they're just going to tell you King 3B, and that's going to be the end of it. But it's actually not the full story. What he played was a 3B with a slide that was retrofitted from a 2B to fit on there. So did Kai Winding. Both of them did. And I mean, 3Bs are 508 on both sides, and 2Bs are dual bore 500, 508. And like, I'm not like making statements, but just like hearing King 2 being recorded, that's immediately where my mind goes, because that's just like I've always found that so fascinating. And like, I don't know how you would get that done. I guess you'd have to get it at a custom shop, but like I've never I don't know, I've never seen one for sale like that. But getting back to like weights here. So lightweight slides are usually about 40 grams lighter ish. Like that's pretty rough, but like, so your bore size is going to dictate your general weight. Obviously it's not like a straight like lightweights are all this size, and then heavies are all this, because a concert horn and a pea shooter are going to have different slides. Whenever you're changing slide weight, you're only changing the weight of the outer sleeve. You're not changing the inner slide. So with that in mind, like heavier horns have heavier slides. And I went on like a little rabbit hole looking for this, and then I found like a trombone chat, which we reference all the time, has a chart. So you guys can probably dig this up yourselves, but like there's a chart where they've recorded like the weight of like tons of slides. Now, granted, this is just people reporting on their own, and that's going to be less than scientific, but there's enough on here that you can get like a general idea and assume that some of them are outliers and some of them may not be true. I know some people got triggered by some of these on here, but like that's a little ridiculous to me. But like, so for example, carbon fibers are down like at 170, 160 grams. Yeah, so the outer slide, just doing the weight. So carbon fiber is around the 170, 170 grams. And then going up from there, what seems to be lightweight slides, we're looking at Bach 12s, some King 3Bs, King 2B jigs is like especially light for some reason. And Olds made a super featherweight horn, which man, I love. This is kind of off topic, but I love when I find about old companies that like really went for ridiculous names. I mean, I play on a Getson Sterling artist model, which is also like, now it's like, especially Yamaha, or somebody like that, it's like the YSL whatever. But like, man, back in the day, they were like naming their trombones like they were racehorses. The old super featherweight, but those were like 170-ish, and then you start getting up into King 3Bs and the Con 6Hs, like 214s kind of normal. And I will admit that I got a little paranoid. Well, not paranoid, but I was super interested. So I weighed mine as well. And what I did was I took my coffee scale, which I weigh about 25 to 30 grams of coffee every morning. So that's kind of like the accuracy we're looking at. And found that my Getson, which is the pea shooter, was about 213 grams. And my BAC, which is like a 545 bore, was 233 grams, 233 and a half. I will say that depending on where I centered the slide on the scale, seemed to change the weight just a little bit. And that definitely made me think about this whole list because I doubt people are like going to the vet and have like a table weight like thing where they're like laying it out. But if you can take some of these as they are, King 3B plus 220, Old Studio 228. Let me get up here a little bit. Go to Bach 36 and Elkhart models 254. King 608 is a 255. Con 88 is 263. So kind of like in that 240, 270 range. Like get some Bach 42s in the 275. And then we get down here, the console based tuning in slide 285. I imagine that had impact. And then like a Quartzois base looks like it was 290. So like I said, it's far from like scientifically accurate, but like a fun deep dive for me for sure. And yeah, I mean, like I just had like I know I like lighter stuff, and I've always kind of thought like it's nice to like be quick, have that vibrato, especially like the people I'm trying to imitate and stuff. But at the same time, I do play on like a nickel silver slide, or I have a sterling horn. But so the slide is nickel, so it's like I'm still using metal. I'm not like full carbon fiber. I'm not gonna lie, like doing research for this pod, I thought about it a lot, but I think ultimately the conclusion I came to was like it would be sick to have an extra one and like try it out, and especially like if I was on a parade or something, use it. But like I'm not made of money, so I can't I can't be buying like spending that much money kind of willy nilly on like that would be nifty to have thing. But I can see the interest and definitely piqued my curiosity.
So, you talked about the advantages of having your slide a little bit more lightweight. As a bass trombone player, I'm going to come from the other side of things. My slide is a little bit wider bore, and so it's going to be heavier. I play a Yamaha YBL 830, the Xeno. Um, and switching between that, I don't really play a large bore tenor that often. I have a Con 88, but it just kind of sits there. My other alternate horn is that Con 48. And so I switch between those two horns quite a bit. One of the things I really like about playing on that bass trombone is the fact that that slide is heavy, and physics come in play. Inertia, an object in motion stays in motion, an object at rest stays at rest. If that slide is stopped, it'll take a decent amount of energy to move that slide. And a lot of times that just means that I'm not going to make a move that I don't intend on making. Every slide motion is usually very intentional. And so there are advantages to having a slightly heavier slide, unless you are playing extremely fast passages, or not even extremely extremely fast passages. But like Cody said, using things like slide vibrato, as a bass trombone is very seldom a slide vibrato called for. I mean, I do like playing jazz on bass trombone. However, I do know that most of the things that are out there that have been done before are not, or do not call for slide vibrato. So that's not something I have to worry about as much. So yeah, I prefer having that heavier slide for the exact same reason that Cody likes having the lighter slide. So I mean, I agree with it, but I was just coming from it from a different angle. I think it's just worth mentioning that there are advantages to having that little bit more heft there. I don't notice the difference that people often talk about having a more centered tone. If I had a lightweight bass trombone slide, maybe I could compare, but I think that goes with materials and a whole lot of other things before it goes with just weight alone.
Yeah, man. So kind of like moving on here, I thought I'd have Ben talk about general care because like I don't not care about my slides. I don't want to get that out there. But like to me, like if the slide feels all right, like I'm living my best life. But I'll tell you right now, man, there was a period when we were in college together where I felt like every day I was like in the practice room, and then this dude be popping in and be like, "Man, I just feel like there's like a micro dent in the slide." Like just the most paranoid person I've ever met about the possibility of a small hang up or something, man. So I'm gonna let Ben take the lead on general care.
So, on that subject, I will preface this by saying that I am very cheap. Okay. I do not like spending money. Okay. I started off as a tuba player. And so that meant that I paid, $100 for mouthpiece, and that was my investment in band. All right, $100. And so when I went from buying a mouthpiece to buying, my first trombone ever was a $4,000 bass YBL 830 bass trombone. It's the bass trombone that I play to this day. The reason I bought it was because of some college scholarship deal that, I had to spend all of it at one time. I couldn't make payments. So my first trombone ended up being a very nice trombone, I'll be honest. Because of that, being the most expensive purchase I ever made, and that is including at the time my truck. So I had more money invested in my trombone than my vehicle that I drove every day. I was very paranoid. So yeah, when my trombone teacher told me, "Hey, whatever you do, do not hit the slide." Well, whenever I knocked that slide against the stand, I did get a little bit scared. Um, on that note, slide care is a lot simpler than people make it out to be. You don't have to be paranoid like me, even though to this day I swear that, I should have taken better care of my face trombone slide, which is better than most slides I've ever felt. I don't, besides a brand spanking new trombone. But yeah, a big thing is, of course, the most important part of your trombone to watch out for would probably be your slide. If you hit your bell, it will affect your sound. I promise you. That's just how metallurgy works. But if you hit your slide, it will affect the way you actually operate that trombone. And that makes huge differences in your playing. If you're a little bit slow or if you have a little bit of a hiccup in your playing, that'll be apparent if you have that dent in your slide. So, protect it. There are certain plastic covers called slide savers that I used for a bit. Um, they deaden your sound. You might hear about them. Some people talk about them. I think the slide savers have a place in marching band, maybe. But even then, in marching band, I didn't march trombone often. Because I played tuba. Tuba was a very in-demand instrument, so I couldn't march trombone till very late. But I did use slide savers when I did march trombone, and it did make a difference. But you could use that in marching band or something like that. But for the most part, you don't need slide coverage. You just need to have awareness. Play on the correct side of the stand. Don't sword fight. When it comes to lubrication, which we're going to talk about lubrication here in a bit, but make sure that you just keep the same lubrication as much as possible when you clean your slide. Don't do anything silly like go from that slide oil that came with your trombone when you bought it in sixth grade. Don't mix that with your Yamaha slide lubricant that you bought because somebody told you it's the best stuff ever, which it is good, but those do not mix. Don't spray water because you saw Joseph Alessi doing it on your slide oil. If you are still using slide oil, by the way, we'll talk about it. Move on. But just learn, depending on whatever lubricant you're using, learn what's going to mix and what doesn't. There might be a Pond's cold cream guy out there. Let me tell you, if you're still using Pond's cold cream, they changed their formula. You need to change your lubricant. Okay. If you're using WD-40, stop. I did a dive in a lubricant and I saw that a couple people used that. Yeah, that's not okay. Even if you think it works, there's carcinogenic effects there. You shouldn't do that. But yeah, just watch out for your slide. A small dent in your slide can honestly affect quite a bit, because what'll happen is you'll create a hang up. You'll be playing, you'll go out to fourth position, and there'll be a little stop. And then you'll skip fifth position already. And fifth position is hard enough. And you'll go out to fifth, or you'll go out to sixth, whatever. So, just don't don't hit it, don't sword fight or whatever. But moving on to lubricant a little bit on that, I was doing some research kind of on the history of lubricants, and they haven't always been friendly to trombonists. As far as I saw, the history of lubricants is pretty simple. People were using vegetable-based or plant-based lubricants first, and that included, even I saw instances of olive oil, vegetable oil, whatever you want to call it. And I do say oil because I'm from the South. I'm sorry. Oil, if you're from the North, there's nothing wrong with saying it either way. But anyways, yeah. So you do, and people did discover that facial cold cream quickly became the favored lubricant for trombone players. I was very surprised to find out that this was the first lubricant that trombone players agreed upon. If you frequent trombone chat, or in the day it used to be trombone forum, the trombone forum, TTS, you would see things about Pond's cold cream, and man, the Pond's cold cream people were like a cult. And now I realize that was the first thing trombonists really had to separate themselves. It really made a big difference. And the closest thing to that original formula, Pond's cold cream, is what we today call slide creams. I personally use a slide cream. It's not because I think slide cream is necessarily the best lubricant. It's because that I don't play trombone for a living. I play trombone every now and then, and I find that slide creams tend to last longer. I did convert from Slido which was a two system lubricant, but it's like a silicone based, very similar to the Yamaha slide lubricant, or the black Slido which is just a single slide lubricant. It's still synthetic. It's not made from petroleum. But I switched from that to slide cream because of the longevity. But people probably would say that upkeep wise, that those slide lubricants are a little bit easier to manage.
Yeah, I'm still on the Slido mix thing myself, man. And I'm not gonna
You
lie,
use black or red?
I used to use red, but I use black now because I'm lazy. I mean, that's honestly the biggest reason. It's not like a conscious effort as far as this is what I'm talking about when I said if it feels good, but I'm not getting crazy. I mean, real quick, man, the Pond's cold cream thing. In case you're like me and you don't wear makeup, you're like, what the hell is cold cream? Pond's cold cream is a makeup remover. I did not know that till I did some research. The first time I ever saw Pond's cold cream was there's this video. I don't know if it's still floating around or not, but there's a video of Bill Watchers talking about his slide routine, and he goes through the whole thing for everybody, and he uses it. And I was like, oh damn, maybe I should use this. And then that's when Ben let me know that it's not the same anymore. Maybe you guys should hit up Pond's Cold Cream and tell them that they're missing out on a whole industry of selling slide lubricant. But
well, you mentioned you use the black Slido mix. If you do not know what the Slido mix thing is, black Slido mix is simply the one formula. It's one bottle. You only have to worry about keeping up with one type of bottle. I used to use the two-step Slido mix. Cody said he used the two-step Slido mix at first. We had the same trombone teacher, so probably our first introduction to like a decent slide lubricant was more than likely the same teacher who showed us that they had a red, which was the small bottle and a big bottle. And it never failed that the small bottle ran out first. It didn't matter if you used one drop of the small bottle runs out first. And I think that other people are having the same issue too. So you know what? If you're out there and your small bottle ran out first, you're not alone. I had good results with the Yamaha snot. Yami snot is what a lot of people call it. People swear by it. I had good luck with trombone. One time I decided to try trombone in a pinch, and I never went back. It's a vegetable based slide cream, very similar to the Pond's cold cream style cream. I like it a lot. I still use it. It's $6 or nah, I don't know, inflation. Probably $7. Probably $7 or $8 by this point. But still, I honestly couldn't. I was still a band director the last time I bought trombone, and it does last a while. So, lubricant wise, it doesn't necessarily matter what type of lubricant you're using. If you're using one of those synthetic lubricants versus a cream, I will say if you're still using a slide oil that's like a petroleum based product, similar to like a valve oil, I do suggest you get off that. As a band director, I tried my best to keep my kids away from that. I said, listen, guys, you could spend a decent amount of money on these slide lubricants like Yamaha or Slido Mix, or you could, spend $7 or $8 on trombone. I really try to stay away from the petroleum based products for a multitude of reasons. I've heard of sicknesses from trumpet players talking about, valve oil, and that makes me a little bit nervous. But also, it's just not as effective as either of those two methods on a trombone slide. Slide oil tries to be thicker than valve oil, but realistically, as a band director, I here's a confession: I use them interchangeably. If I had a bottle of slide oil, I'd put it on a valve for a tuba, and then vice versa. It didn't make a lick of difference. Um, if it was just a petroleum based oil that was, one was slightly, and I mean very slightly thicker than the other, it didn't make any difference. I really tried my best to keep my trombones away from the petroleum based stuff. It's just, there's no reason to worry about it, especially since we don't know the health effects. If you're listening to this podcast and you play trombone a lot, why would you expose yourself to something like that when a purchase of $6 or $7 could keep you away from it in general?
Yeah, man, it is crazy. I mean, really, the whole thing is nuts. Like, I think about other people who don't play trombone listening to this, and they're like, "You guys lube up your slides," and it really is crazy. We're like lubing up a metal slide to make sure that it functions properly, which is crazy. I mean, like, imagine if there's just nothing like that to me. I mean, bass players, I guess, change their strings or something, but it's not like they're trying to smooth out their instrument that's made of. I just the whole thing is crazy, and I do think that there can be some effects to like what you're using. I don't think people do this enough, and I know that like UNT I think has a whole department devoted to like musical health and stuff, but think about what's going on. Like if something's making you feel unhealthy, like it could be your horn. I mean, like um Elliot Mason has like a brass allergy, and he didn't even know he had a brass allergy until like halfway through his life. He just thought he had a lot of breakouts around his mouth and stuff, and he made the switch and realized that's what it was. Like mouth cheddar, as Ben so disgustingly calls it, like stuff coming off your lips and stuff. Like maybe if you have an insane amount, maybe there's something going on. Like playing the trombone is not necessarily the most natural thing a human can do. Blowing into a slide that's made of metal.
Yeah, and you talk about this. Long exposure to heavy metals in general will cause you problems. I told you guys I am a fishing guide. Something that a decision I guess I made as a fishing guide when I decided to go full time was to stay away from lead full time. If any of our trombone players here are anglers, you know that lead is, it's immersed in the fishing business. split shot, weight, anything that is used to weigh things down is made with lead. I decided for my health to avoid something that is so ingrained in the industry because I realized that if I want to do it long term, that I need to drop that out for my health. The same thing goes with trombone. If you or any instrument, if you can avoid something that could possibly cause you health risk, then why would you go with a petroleum product? If you have played a valve instrument before, God bless you, you've probably come in contact with blue juice. In my experience for a valved instrument, blue juice is seriously one of the best acting valve oils. It has a very potent smell. I'm assuming if you can smell that product, that it is probably entering your body. I don't know if it's entering your body in a way that might give you adverse health effects, but it's something worth thinking about. I played tuba for a while. I used a lot of blue juice. It honestly does give me a little bit of concern knowing how much I used and how often I used it. So I always struggled telling my students when I was a band director, hey, you should use this. And even though synthetic valve oils and things like that were slightly inferior, I still suggested those because I was thinking in the long term, especially for the students who made it seem like it was something they'd pursue for the rest of their life. 40 years, 50 years, that's a long time to be exposed to something. It would suck to tell your wife, well, I had a lot of fun playing trumpet. Too bad it's got my pancreas or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, on that on that very dark, real note, I think we're gonna go back to like the gear stuff, man. The next thing I want to talk about, I wasn't sure really which order to do these in, but I guess we'll go in order of the horn or whatever. Let's talk about lead pipes. Lead pipes are like one of these things for me, and I'm sure this is true for most of you, where it's like you know that it's a thing, you know it makes a difference, but you know nothing about it. And like that's okay. Like that's totally cool. Like sometimes thinking things are magic is like the best way to go about it because you don't have biases towards weird things. That being said, there's some people who like really get into their lead pipes. And for me, like I think early on, like one of my identifiers of like serious gearheads was like if you were on anything talking about how you got a custom lead pipe, to me, like you were deep down the gear hole. Cause I mean, I don't know, that's a lot, homie. I mean, more power to you, man, if you think that's what's like. And it like I'm not it definitely makes a difference. But for me, like I had them on I actually don't have okay, first of all, every trombone has a lead pipe. I was that's it, like so like I that's some of them are soldered in. Other ones are removable lead pipes. I had removable lead pipes on my Getson 3508 back when I played that. I think that's pretty standard on all the new Getson lines and all the new Edwards. And I think like even they were like the first ones to offer removable lead pipes. Getson was. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure I saw that. I'll get to this in a second, but I found a super nice write up by Christian Griego, who's like one of the world's premier trombone builders, talking about lead pipes, and I learned a ton from that. To give you a very very basic idea of what's going on, is they're about 7.5 to 9 inches deep, like they change in terms of like how open they are. And what it is when you go straight down, first of all you have the receiver, and usually there's some kind of indicator of the size of it on there. I mean, maybe this is Getson exclusive, but Getson does like little ridges. So on their most open they'll have 3 ridges, and then like they'll have 2 ridges for the medium and then one for the small. But there's the receiver, and then there's like a little area right after the receiver that's just like your normal piping, and then there's a really closed off area called the venturi. And then depending on how open that venturi is basically the design of the lead pipe. The wider it is, obviously it's going to get wider out slower. The thinner it is, it's going to go faster as it widens back out, because they both have to hit the same size. um And like I've played with these a little bit. Like I remember with my Getson, like I had never had them before. I played it. I was like, okay, like this is pretty interesting. And then it was like, okay, I'm gonna try these lead pipes and I'm gonna play them for someone else. And I just ended up playing on what I was already using. Now there's a good chance that that's because that's what I gotten most familiar with. But it is interesting to have that option. There's an opposite camp, which is basically that you have the right lead pipe and you don't need to change it. Like I've never the horns that it's soldered in. I've never thought about it. I mean, well, I say that I've never thought about it on my Sterling Artist model. When Ben was there for this, and like I think we've talked about this on this pod even before. But when I went and picked up my BAC, Mike Corrigan was telling me that there was like a sweet spot on the lead pipe. So before he soldered it in, like I played it and then he moved it a little bit. I played it, I moved it, and we did that until like we found the perfect rotation. Now, this like is basically witchcraft. I'm not telling you any kind of science on this. I don't have any hard facts, but I felt like I felt a difference. And that's interesting to me. Like that kind of sends the argument of soldering in. That being said, I know that like particularly the Jupiter XO models have like a clicking mechanism to where it like hits a certain spot, and I think Getsons do, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, that's kind of the lead pipe thing.
Well, you mentioned that moment, and I've thought about that a lot because as a player, when we do not hear the instrument necessarily as the audience does. I mean, that's just the way it is. When you talk, you don't sound like you do on a microphone. Um, when I heard you play on the lead pipe, this was the day you were picking up this instrument you were getting made for yourself. Mike, he twisted that thing around, and it did make a difference on each rotation. And then finally, you picked the one that worked for you. That's not to say necessarily that one side sounded better than the other. When Cody says the sweet spot, he means the sweet spot that played best for him. Now, there's all sorts of things that go into that, and none of this can be, quantified scientifically. This is all going to be, this was my experience with this specific horn. But like you said, you know, most horns, they're soldered in. There's nothing you can do with it. You have to work with what you got. The interchangeable lead pipes, even when they screw in, they're going to be screwed in at a certain twist. So there's nothing you can change. Even with that, you only thing you're changing is the material. So it's worth stating that the rotation of that lead pipe only matters if you're getting that horn custom made for you, or if you have the ability to solder that in. But it was impressive to see the difference, to see Cody play on it. And I heard, distinct differences in each rotation as they figured that out. And that was pretty eye opening to me. Since I wasn't involved with it, I was just the outside listener.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like I will say I'm pretty sure that like if you're like a super gearhead and you're like, oh no, I don't have an interchangeable lead pipe, there's people who will do that for you. So if you want to pay for it, and there's people who make lead pipes like independent. You can get them from like Shires or Wrath, and they have you can go to their websites and they'll like tell you how they organize and how they do them.
Here's
Uh,
the play for Brass Arc, man. Their lead pipes
yeah,
are that's their thing. I'm pretty sure. I don't know what they have is more popular than their lead pipes actually.
yeah, they do the big custom lead pipes, and also they do like they'll sell older trombones. One of the big things that I found out about is apparently like Jim Bow, which makes like these notoriously bad like instruments. They make an alto trombone, and a lot of people say that if you switch out the lead pipe on it with a custom lead pipe that's longer, it's like a really good horn. And I mean, I don't know, do with that what you will. Um, But yeah, you're basically looking at feel in terms of compression and then like how open it is. So there is some good stuff out there on like this kind of stuff. I think Christian Griego had like a long thing that I read on how to pick one out. But yeah, lead pipes, like I'm not claiming to be an expert. It's like, to me, it's like I do think there's a difference in feel. Like I've always felt that, and I understand the idea of how it gets more open, how it like darkens or richens your sound, but it also makes it, quote unquote, harder to play. But
I,
like past that, I don't have like a ton.
I guess if you're a bass trombone player, lead pipes might seem important, but remember that Charlie Vernon, in order to fit his Shilky 61, which is a massive mouthpiece. I play on the Shilky 60, which is probably too big for me, but I play the same mouthpiece over and over. So I'm in that camp. But Charlie Vernon has a Shilky 61, and it requires that he not have a lead pipe altogether. So, people have different views on that, and what different lead pipes mean. And that a lot has to do with materials, supposedly. But I've never once played interchangeable lead pipes, so I'm sure Cody has more insight on the materials than I do myself.
Yeah, so moving on with kind of the general lead pipe thing, what do you got for me on bore size, Ben?
On bore size, so I play a bass trombone. So I'd say standard bass trombone bore is going to be 0.562 inches. That is an arbitrary number. Back in the day, that number might have been different. Actually, it was different. Um, Bore size matters only when compared to the other instruments in a group. Let's go ahead and say that our standard jazz tenor trombone is going to be a 0.500. Your King 2B will be two different bore sizes. That's what the 2B stands for, two bores. I think a 3B, Cody, you can tell me is I think a 0.508 mostly, but I think the
Yeah.
3BF might be a little bit bigger,
No,
or
it's
the
a five.
3B
It's
plus.
50. It's 508 on both sides. 3B plus is the only time when it gets bigger.
But yeah, so these bore sizes, what that means is the slide diameter itself is a little bit bigger. Now that's a whole rabbit hole in itself to go down when you start thinking of bore size. There is a train of thought that, you know, uh, for a while at least, 0.547 was considered really, really big. It was most bass trombones were about that or even smaller. Uh, but now that is the go-to orchestral trombone size. At one point, a G bass trombone, a bass trombone that is actually pitched in G, so quite a bit lower than our B flat bass trombones today, which are just a tenor trombone with a couple extra attachments. They were actually in 0.480 diameter. They had a little bit brighter sound. When I say a brighter sound, that is that is a more cylindrical bore sound, I guess is what I could say. That's an interesting concept when you say a brighter versus a darker sound. That's really the only way I can think of to say it. 0.562 is the go-to bass trombone, and I will go to that. But even there's differences within that. For example, when you have German trombones, you might have smaller bore trombones going to a 0.547, like a 525 to a 0.547. Or you might have, for the bass trombones, you might have a 0.547 to a 0.562. Or I knew a guy who played on the Jupiter XO bass trombone, which was a 0.562 to a 0.57 and change. I don't remember. I think it's a 0.578, but that seems a little bit big to me. I play a 0.562 straight, single bore instrument. Now, This is probably confusing. I'm sitting here throwing a bunch of numbers out. When I say a dual bore trombone, if I'm saying it's two different bores, what I'm talking about is the inner slide is going to be on the lead pipe, for example. On the side that has a lead pipe will be the first number, and then the side going to the bell would be the second number. So let's say a 2B would be 0.500 to a 508. That would be a dual bore slide versus my Con 48, which is just 0.500, which is a single bore slide. All around, both sides of the slide are the exact same. You could flip the slide around, you can flip it upside down and not have any issues. Realistically, I've heard differing opinions on that. The most common thing I hear about the advantage of dual bore slides is that you get more sound with less air. My trombone teachers in the past have told me that that's not necessarily the case, but if you go on the internet, they say the opposite. So I don't know. Cody, you've played on both. Have you noticed the difference between your dual bore and your single bore trombones? Besides,
Yeah.
I mean, everything else.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. I didn't really think about it a whole lot in the past, but my 3508 was a dual bore. But my BAC and my Sterling are both just normal. And I don't know, I'm like I've ran into people who are like, "Oh, you got to have dual bore and stuff," but it's so hard for me to make a judgment on that just based on like the fact that I've never had a dual bore trombone that I then played a non-dual bore slide on. So it's like, because to me it's like there's just such an overall picture of the horn that it's like impossible for me to make a real comparison with that. I certainly haven't been like, oh, dual bores do this for me, and maybe they do, but like nothing that I've been able to point out on my own. So yeah, I know personally, like I don't know if there's. I'm not saying there's not a difference, but it's nothing that I've been able to point out and like put my finger on.
Yeah, I think the biggest argument against the dual bore is almost the exact same company that really started out with the dual bore. So like King, with the King 2B, that was their dual bore trombone. And you would think that if the dual bore was the be all end all of jazz trombone sounds, that the 3B wouldn't have been as popular as it was. But the 3B does not mean that there were three different bores in that trombone. 3B was just their single bore model trombone that happened to be a little bit bigger than the 2B. And because of that, I honestly do believe that it has more to do with the construction of the entire horn than necessarily the bore of one slide followed by the, or one part of the slide followed by the next. I mean, the trombone slide changes drastically once you get to the bell section, anyways. So that rate of change alone is going to make probably a much bigger difference than necessarily, one slide stock or one part of the slide to the other. I will say that in historically, trombones tended to be a much smaller bore. Um, you know, maybe 547 wasn't always the orchestral norm, but it's kind of been an arms race, and we've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and we've landed where we're at right now. I I honestly don't mind it as long as we kind of keep things in proportion. They should be fine. But yeah, for a while, these guys were playing on trombones that the slide was in the 0.500. That was on the bigger side for a while, and they got around just fine. So a lot of times you'll hear band directors, for example, talk about how you get to a certain grade, you need an F attachment. While no, not all trombones with an F attachment have a slide diameter of 0.547, most do, with the exception of medium bore trombones like the Bach 36. Usually the band directors are asking for that mostly because of, well, maybe out of ignorance, but I like to believe just out of trying to keep things the same. You want a trombone section that has the same slide diameter because maybe that'll keep their tone similar. There's a whole lot of other factors that go into that than
Yeah,
necessarily
I
slide
think you're
diameter.
honestly giving people the benefit of the doubt, man. I think that non-trombonists, like when they're band directors and they go in, they're like, "Oh, this is like a beginner horn and this is an intermediate horn," and that's where it lies for them. I don't think they have any thoughts as to like past that. Man, it's funny you mentioned like horns getting bigger and bigger and bigger because like that always makes me think of like Bart Versalona, who was like the first bass trombonist for Stan Kenton. And I don't know the accuracy of the story, but supposedly like the first bass trombone that he ever played in Stan Kenton, like he went to a music shop and he saw this horn with the trigger, and it was just like a normal 525 concert horn, and he was like, "Whoa, like look at this huge horn." And then like Stankin was like, "Oh my god, it's a bass trombone," and then they're playing it, and he's like, "Oh, I like this dark sound," so he like kept going. But yeah, the first one in Stan Kenton, who famously uses two bass trombones, was just like a 525 concert horn. And you'll see. I mean, myself, I'm a stealer of bass trombone gigs. I've done a ton of bass trombone gigs on my concert horn. I'm not condoning that. I'm just saying that I don't own a bass trombone, and when the opportunity arose, I took it. But like Chris Crenshaw in Lincoln Center will do the same thing. He'll whip out like a Bach 42 or something whenever they need like a plug and place bass trombone. I will say, side note, this is completely unrelated, but when Christian McBride played with them, he brought his own bass trombonist. I can't remember who it was, but I don't know. I mean, if you don't dig Christian McBride, like you get hit. Like you should definitely go check him out. But if you're a bass trombonist, now you have to. You don't have a choice.
Well, the bass trombone has gotten huge. I mentioned Tyne earlier. Uh, Tyne, I guess their go-to bass trombone artist has been Van Dyke. He plays on a bass trombone that is not necessarily Tyne's normal bass trombone. Their go-to bass trombone is actually a dual bore 547 to 562 bore. But that first thing, 547, most American bass trombones are actually start at 562 and then go up from there. So even today, we have such giant divides in the diameter of these trombone sections. And so what happens is you'll get these conductors who don't know the difference between trombones. And I've heard people talk about this before. If they have a trigger on that trombone, they'll sit there and talk about what the difference is. But you could have a tenor trombone with no F attachment in 547 bore, and I imagine there'd be a conductor out there who would sit there and complain that it doesn't sound the same just because, well, it looks different. And
Yeah.
if you're against orchestras looking different, I ask you to find the left-hand violinist. There is an aesthetic to it. We like to ignore it, but there is. So us brass players are not immune to that, as much as we like to think that. Slide diameter is an interesting thing to, I guess, to examine because it makes such a difference. I will say, if you're just starting out on trombone, hold on to that 500 board, that little, that you'll hear people call it a pea shooter. Hold on to that small horn as long as you can until you are told you have to switch, because the longer you can stay on your first instrument, the more time you have. The gap between that jazz horn, that 500 bore, and that first trigger trombone you get is huge, and people don't realize that. It's easier to switch from a bass trombone to a tenor trombone than it is to switch from most of your beginner trombones to that intermediate or even what you'll call a professional level trombone, like a Con 18 to a Bach 42, or a Con 18 to a Con 88, I guess. It's that's a much bigger bridge to gap, or a bridge to cross, than necessarily a bass to a tenor.
Well, I think it's only fitting that like our last subject be spit valves. I mean, we have to talk about what these slides do when they're done, man. I think like it's funny. I actually learned a lot about spit valves because I'm not gonna say I take them for granted because I have thought about them a little bit since I have some different ones or whatever. But I think in general, spit valves are an unsung hero, man. Like no one cares about them until they're broken, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, this is no bueno. Um, like spit valves and water keys are the same thing. But it's funny. I was talking to one of my friends who was in band in high school, and he was like, oh, my director said like, don't call it a spit valve. Like, there's another name for it. I was like, oh, you mean like a water key? And he's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like spit valves, like gross. And I was like, look, man, like, I there's a guy I met and one time he said there's two kinds of people in this world: people who play trombone and people who don't. And let me tell you, man, people who play trombone, it's a spit valve. Like, come on. Like, I I'm not trying to get so up and you not be saying spit. Like, give me a break, man. But so there's two things I want to break into. I mean, first is the different types of spit valves, and then we're going to break down like the fundamental spit valve, which is most common. So your most common spit valve is obviously like the trigger, where it's on like a little spring, and you hit it down and it opens up and like you just blow out the spit, and that's like what's on 90% of horns, I would say. I mean, maybe not quite that much, but to me it seems like it's pretty overwhelming. But then there's also the Amato spit valve, which is actually pretty common on trumpets. This is kind of like, you probably haven't seen a ton of them on trombone, and for what it's worth, the internet bashed them pretty hard with the trombone slide, and I guess it's just a matter of length with them not working. The big thing is that with the Amato, it's like a little bitty round metal piece at the end of your slide, and then there's a button, and when you hit the button, like the spit like comes out. And I'd have never seen one of these like on a trombone that I've used, so I don't really know what's up, but like the internet was pretty anti them. I have seen them on trumpets. I guess it's just like the whole gap that's causing an issue. And once again, this kind of brings up the point of like, you don't think about your spit valve till it's a problem, and if it's a problem, then you need a change. A lot of people complain about gurgling, which I guess means it's not getting the spit out, I would assume. And they like need regular oiling. But yeah, like a lot of hate for that. Another one that's I would say kind of like a little trendier or like a more modern thing is like the Saturn valve. Um, I guess I'll go ahead and tell this because I mean it's whatever. Ben's not a teacher anymore, so I don't care. But whenever I have a Saturn valve on my BAC, and I think that Mike has like maybe he has a patent on his own. I don't know. Maybe this is just a straight joke, but he said it was a what is it? Sanuru? Yeah, Sanuru valve.
Yes, the new
Which backwards is Uranus. Which makes the leakage extra funny, man. But I I have to like I found that these were kind of interesting because it was pretty split. Like the internet, much like with carbon fiber, one of the more intense things we've talked about, like people were either really for them or really against them. Some people get them retrofitted on all their horns. I mean, I don't know. I will say, not to like hate on it, but I will say having one on my BAC, like at the end of the day, I kind of just prefer the normal valve with less hassle. There is some perks to it. It's a ring, and then there's like a little area that comes out of your trombone, and in that area there's a little metal ball bearing, and then when you press the ring, it moves the ball bearing, the spit comes out. Now obviously this like kind of like you're not going to run out of like your cork or your neoprene or something, like it's going to last, and that's a huge plus. And it's like really accessible, like you can kind of, however you can get your hand to it, you can press on it and blow it, which doesn't seem like a big deal. But I was seeing someone review the carbon fiber slides, and one of their big complaints was the spit valve, because it's got one of the more square ends on it, and like I guess the spit valve is like on the far end, so they were having a lot of trouble opening it, and even when they did, there wasn't a huge like opening area for it to come out on. But if you haven't seen a Saturn, I'd say like look them up. I don't know if I would just go out of my way to get it changed, but like if you hate your split valve, it's an option. So the other thing I looked up, which I don't know anything about these, is like a joy key. I guess Waterwick is another one, and what it is like it's like a spit valve. You just screw it on the end, and it's got some kind of weird like hive material, and it slowly filters out the spit, so it just kind of like drips as you're playing, which to me is super disgusting. I don't mean to take like a hard angle on that, but like, yeah, man, I mean, like if my spit valve is leaking, I'm like, oh, that's like a problem. But whatever, teach his own, you know. Like I know one of the places that it's used a lot more is on French horns, and I don't know what you know about French horns, but it's like some French horns don't even have spit valves, so these dudes will just be like pulling all of their like pipes out to like drain them, pop them back in, and like they're trying to find the bubble and all that. So I guess on that note, be gracious that you're not, you know, a French horn player. I don't know how often we say that on here, but you know, thank goodness we don't play the French horn. But yeah, those are kind of the different kinds. Now there's probably other stuff out there, but like really those are the big ones. And honestly, I don't know how big they are. It seems like the Saturn is kind of gaining some traction. Like I see that around, and maybe you have a joy key. Amato is like, I really don't see that or anything. I know it's out there, but it's like people hate it too. I just imagine that's kind of dead for the trombone. Also, if you have an Amato, please don't take offense. Like, whatever's working for you, I don't care. But you know, I got to thinking about while I was doing this, and this turned into like such a big rabbit hole that I wasn't expecting. Was like the stopper on your traditional spit valve. So they're not the same. Some of them are cork, and some of them are neoprene, and you may not know what you have, which would be, it's kind of funny because like you don't think about that often. But if you don't know, go ahead and open it up, and it'll either be cork like you'd see in a wine bottle, or it'll be like black rubber. And real quickly, like neoprene was invented in 1930 because like natural rubber cost was like going way up. So what neoprene is a synthetic rubber, and it's basically a polymer. So it's like collecting compounds, and if it's open or closed depends on whether or not it's waterproof. And past that, I'm not a chemist, so like if you want if you want to know more about neoprene, look it up, man. Don't come to me about it. But like my big interest with it was like, how does it hold up in the conditions as a spit valve? So basically, it's a flat little piece of material that's getting pressed against the trombone, and I would imagine just sitting in like a moist little area. And it's funny, like there's a lot of information on neoprene out there because it's used for a ton of stuff. It's used for gaskets a lot, and it's used for like car seats. And I know Ben will talk about this in a second, but it's used for fly fishing handles, and he has strong opinions because of that.
So, like, neoprene versus cork is such a weird thing because, like, you know, in the fishing industry in general, we have experience with neoprene waders. You'll hear that. There's not cork waders, whatever. But this is a weird thing because I am a fishing guide. That's my main profession now. And I do encounter cork and neoprene quite a bit, mostly in the handles. But what handles of like, you know, fishing rods. But what's crazy is the fact that the conditions are eerily similar. You need wet conditions that involve a lot of wear and tear, a lot of movement. So wet with movement. And what I've noticed personally is I prefer cork, but both compounds are really good when it comes to, being waterproof and resisting wear and tear, but both will require replacement at some point. So out of my personal experience, my spit valve is cork. As a band director, I ran into a lot of both. I did purchase cork more often than not, probably because I'm a superstitious guy. And after noticing that my fishing, I was preferring cork, I ended up buying more cork replacements for spit valves. Because spit valves, all that is a hole in your horn. You're paying somebody to put a hole in your horn, and then you are trying to figure out what's best to plug up your brass, cork or rubber. And while neither is ideal because brass would be better, brass does not seal as well as either of those. So you are either using a piece of plant or petroleum, and either way, it will not be the best as if you had a straight horn. But because condensation happens, you have to make one of those choices. And so I usually choose cork, but neoprene is acceptable as well because you'll see in a lot of very high level instruments, professional grade instruments, you might want to call them, you'll still see neoprene show up. So it's not fair to count neoprene out of the game. I'll say cork. I prefer cork because I have experience in the water, but I don't think that makes as much of a difference as long as you're getting a good seal. And I'm sure Cody would agree that both of them perform at least to a standard that is acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, despite my huge deep dive, because I do get some info about cork for you too. If it's covering the hole, it's covering the hole. You're good. But um, yeah, the thing is that neoprene is a little harder than cork, and I can see how that's a factor. I will say that in general, the shelf life isn't as good as cork, and this is obvious when you think about it, because cork is like used for wine bottles, and wine famously ages for a long time. And cork does have like a time period when it's considered best for storage, but that's like 25 to 30 years is when you should consider changing your cork on your wine bottle for maximum performance. Like neoprene, I think doesn't last that long in general. I think it lasts like 5, 7, maybe even 8 years, and those are like in dry conditions. Keeping it in wet conditions is supposedly worse for it. Now, that being said, I thought about this. It's not like my cork stoppers have just like fell apart on me immediately. So whatever's going on, it's not, I'm not saying it's cardboard. It's it's far from that.
No.
But I did actually learn a lot about cork that was just good in general. Like, I don't know, you don't think about this a lot, but I think me and Ben's like first reaction for both of us was like, oh well, you're doing neoprene, you're doing this like synthetic, like man-made thing that's hard on the environment, and if you're doing cork, you're cutting down trees. But actually, most cork comes from Portugal, and when they get cork, it's off a layer of the bark, and it doesn't kill the tree, so it's like actually not bad on the environment at all. There's been a bunch of studies done, like in universities in Europe about the carbon footprint that it creates, and like it's like surprisingly good in terms of materials to use. So I don't know. I guess if you want to make an eco-friendly decision, like there's that. And like I said, it does have the long shelf life. The big thing is, and I guess you could argue that this is a bad thing, is like cork has a really good ability to like hold, like squeeze into a different shape and hold that shape and then form out into a different shape really quickly, which is how wine bottles work. When you pop a wine cork, it's hard to get back in there, right? Because it's like it gets bigger. Now, this is like weird when you think about the valve pressing on your horn and it pressing on that little circle over and over again. So that's definitely, I think, I don't know, maybe that's a plus for neoprene. It's tough to say. I do think, like, after all this research, I was like, man, maybe I should like consciously choose cork. But I told Ben this too. It's like, it doesn't matter what you choose, because at the end of the day, like, if you go in to like get your horn fixed up and the guy's like, oh, I'll change it for you, your repair tech's just going to use what he's got on hand. He's not going to give you the option. It's not that bougie.
Hey, Cody, did you have have you had an instrument that possibly had tape at one point covering a hole in it? And
I,
if
I did. I should have mentioned this at the top of the episode when we talked about our weeks or whatever. But I'll go ahead and say it now for the people who've like stuck this bad boy out. But I did have a 3B that I was saving that I got, through means, and I was trying to bring back to life. And one of the things with it is that I guess one of these dents had just been hit through to the point that there was a hole in the main tuning slide in the back, and it was like they had just wrapped it off with tape. And you know what, like, it did play. Like, I'll say that, like, it didn't like leak. Like, I mean, I'm sure it was bad to play, but it worked. And the cool part of the story is, like, just like 2 days ago, I finally switched it out. I got like the replacement part from the con factory, and I first of all, I do not suggest this, especially if you're like a middle school kid or you're like a parent and you're like, oh, my kid's horn's messed up. Don't do this. I only did this because I did not care what happened with this horn. But I heated it up and I was able to loosen up the solder, and I pulled out the old tuning crook, and then I like basically wedged the new one in there because it'll just kind of slide in there a little bit. And then I heated it up a little bit so it go in there a little deeper, and then I just did a little soldering line around the top. And it's definitely not pretty, but I totally fixed it. I mean, that's a good seal. It doesn't look great, but I'm super proud of it. But once again, I feel the need to say, like, if you're 15 and you're listening to this episode and you're like, oh, like, I can do that with my broken horn, don't. It's
well, hold on now.
Take it to the tech, man.
Keep in mind that back in the day, people used to be able to do this by themselves. So I think it is worth noting that if you go through the proper procedures, that, hey, do it yourself. But yeah, in Cody's circumstance, it's pretty impressive that he managed to get it the way he did. I will say that as a tuba player, man, band programs in general, they would try to get the best out of their instruments they could. This is not an exaggeration. I did play on a horn that I knew at the time was at least 70 years old. The reason I know this is because as a tuba player, I saw that my instrument had a marking from Arkansas A&M, which was the college that I went to. That was the name of the college 70 years ago, 70 years before I played on it as a freshman. And yes, it didn't have proper spit valves. I taped it up with some electric tape, and I never had an issue with it. Did I have to pull the slides out to empty the spit? Yes, I did. So it didn't work as well as it should have. I bet you cork or neoprene would have been better than electric tape. So I don't know if it matters as much. I'll say that I prefer cork, but I've been on the tape side of things as well, because that's just the way things go. Maybe they had it figured out before they even ever had spit valves. I bet you those instruments sounded better. Maybe nobody figured that out, or maybe nobody even noticed back then. But yeah, French horns don't have spit valves on every single one of their slides, though every now and then you'll see some that do, or that have close to it. But yeah, it shouldn't make that much of a difference. If not, it's marginal.
Well, I think we're gonna wrap up this incredibly long episode. I'm either gonna cut a ton out of this, or this is gonna be a good old two-parter. should be pretty sick. We did the album rec for the week already. So I think like I just want to like say that I don't know, man. Like we obviously did this really frequently, and then we gathered a listener base that I never thought we'd have. And then we took a long time off, and then we put another episode out, and people actually listened to that episode, surprisingly. And then we quit doing them, and I can say like personally with what's going on in my life, or like I'm promising you guys, like I'll be back on it, and I can say that like you guys listening really does mean so much to me.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning. I didn't expect this either. To be honest, I just joined this so I could just hang out and drink with my buddy Cody. I mean, that's really the reason I did this. He edits everything, but it's really cool to have the base that we already had. And I know how RSS feeds worked, and you probably didn't unsubscribe from the slideshow, so you just got this updated. I'm excited to see where this goes. Um, we really appreciate everything you guys have been through with us, and it's just really exciting to see people talk about trombone. If you're not a member of Trombone Chat, I highly suggest you go ahead and join that so you could just join the discussion because we pull so much from that in general. I'll be honest, I haven't been where I need to be when it comes to playing the trombone. But if you're still following us with the trombone or with the slideshow, man, thank you. Thank you for hanging on there. I know this is a long episode, but we sure appreciate it.
All right. Well, as always, happy shedding,